Okay, I guess this is, technically speaking, the Maya Philosophy podcast, episode 2. I wanted to continue on the theme, if there was a theme, from the last discussion of systems within systems. I got maybe a little bit disorganized at times on a perhaps similar but maybe more easily articulated discussion of frameworks. A framework is maybe a synonym for a system, maybe it refers to something slightly different. I don't know. But you'll find in a lot of philosophy courses, if you take them at university or you watch philosophy videos online or some combination of those two things, is I think you'll find that a lot of the time the conversations that people are having about what they think or what they believe or what you should or shouldn't do, it's usually once you start hearing the word should that you're doing some sort of philosophy. What should you think, right? What should you believe? How should you live your life? People would call that a normative claim in that context. That is, I think, where you will begin to find that a lot of the disagreements, not all of them, okay, some of them are quite substantive, but many of the disagreements flow from just competing definitions of like the same word or concept, right? So sometimes people are going to be having a disagreement over what the good is, the good life, the good ethical conduct. I mean, you can just go on and on from there. This question of what is and is not good, it's one that has been debated for very long. And so when you're in that setting, it seems very tempting to immediately skip to the part where you point out that we're just having like a semantic disagreement over what the word good means. But if you do, there is a sense in which you're kind of disrespecting the lineage and the practice of trying to actually articulate why your understanding or approximation of this perhaps unapproachable or undefinable concept, why that's better. And then, of course, you could have a very long debate over what better in this context means as well, right? What does it mean to have a better argument than someone? Is it more persuasive? Is that just like a popularity contest? Is it truer in some eternal sense? There's going to be a lot of people who take issue with that as well. All of which is to say that if you just try to, like many intro to philosophy students who think they're smarter than they are will try to do this, if you just try to sort of skip to the part where you go like, herder, aren't we all just having a semantic disagreement because none of us can actually prove like what the good means? You're not wrong. You're still an asshole, right? You're not wrong. We can't really show you what truth or justice or goodness looks like under a microscope in some clearly reproducible and falsifiable capacity. But that doesn't necessarily mean you get to skip all of the hard work of trying to piece it together. You don't get to just say that and then not engage with the text, as some would say. Okay, what was all of this meant to elaborate? Frameworks versus systems. Does it refer to the same thing or not? I don't know. How do we differentiate one system from another? Isn't there some inherent arbitrariness to that all? Yes, absolutely. But that does not mean that all systems, or at least their presentation, right, the case that is made for them, it doesn't mean that those are all created equally. And I believe as an article of faith, if you will, that there is actually still quite a lot of merit to working through them and trying to explain their benefits and their disadvantages or their costs, right? Why they might be useful in certain contexts and not in others. One of those frameworks that I think has some connection, more broadly speaking, to martial arts and the practice of confrontation with other people or other beings, is how inevitable or intrinsic you feel that confrontation is to life itself. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to say, hey, in the event that something were to happen, some confrontation were to arise between you and another person, gee shucks, wouldn't it be a good idea to be prepared for that confrontation, right? And I think to myself, yeah, that's plausible, certainly. But at the same time, there's an optimization problem, right? Because if you are to say the likelihood of confrontation is very high, and therefore you should spend a lot of your time thinking about and preparing for that confrontation, that sort of puts you on a different path, right, than if you were to just say to yourself, there's some risk of confrontation. It's not inevitable. It's not the defining feature of reality, whatever that means. But certainly there's a there. And so I'll devote some of my time in a kind of modest and moderate way to preparing myself for the risk of confrontation, the possibility of confrontation. But I won't be consumed by this fear or this threat. That starts to raise some philosophical disagreement already, at least that I've observed. Because there are people, we don't have to name names or, draw out specific examples, but there are people whose framework for interpreting reality is certainly very adversarial, that really does see life as this thing that is perpetually trying to destroy you, to kill you. And if that is the framework that you are operating under, you're going to have a very militant and martial attitude, I think. And it's not necessarily, this is martial arts yoga, so am I endorsing that perspective? No, I don't think so. But I am going to try and give it give the devil his due, as Jordan Peterson would say. I'm going to try and at least defend the principle on some level, because certainly at the most kind of materialist level of analysis, we are constituted by physical forces, a life energy, if you will, that is churning against the universe, right? That is, I don't know if calling it the battle against entropy is correct from a physicist's point of view. I certainly wouldn't want to upset any physicists that might be listening to this. But there's a sense in which, right, we are matter that has been constituted into a specific shape, and we are doing our darndest to maintain a reasonable approximation of that shape for the longest period of time that we can, until finally, the universe wins, our capacity to continue materially reproducing our physical form comes to an end, and we dissolve back into the thing that we came from. That's why they say from dust to dust in funerals. We emerge from dust and we return to dust. There's a cyclicality. And we are just our conscious experiences are, in a sense, a constant struggle against the universe trying to dissolve us back into nothing. It's like the consciousness emerges screaming from the void, right? The infant emerging from it's their mother's womb. The infant emerges screaming from the void and then continues screaming until it runs out of steam. This is a somewhat existentialist, somewhat depressing maybe to some way of thinking about these things, and it's certainly not meant to be, because we'll get there, right? The framework is right now just describing a kind of material condition. It hasn't really attached normative judgment to it yet, I think. It's just saying, look, you might feel a certain way about the purpose of your life and its meaning and its significance, and that's all fine and dandy. But if you don't take care of these basic material needs that you have to eat, sleep, to have shelter, I would include, it's debatable whether this is a material need or not, but I would add to that some like physical community. You need people around you, and I mean in like real space. Okay, I don't want to get too controversial here for some of the neat life enthusiasts out there, but let's put an asterisk next to that one, okay? But food, I think we all agree, you got to eat, you got to drink water, right? You can't be exposed to really harsh external conditions, weather conditions. That's not gonna fly either. And so that is just an observation of a sort of material reality that you exist in. From there, then you make the move, if you choose to, and I think many do. Many people who present this as merely a material reality are then concealing the normative suggestions or implications that they would like you to have based on that conclusion, right? They're not necessarily like being dishonest and trying to hide the ball, but the slide from an is to an ought, as the philosophy students would say, or the movement from I'm just describing the world to I'm telling you how you should live, how you should operate within it, that slide tends to happen, not always, but often happens in a kind of sneaky way. It's like people don't announce to you, like, I am now transitioning from an is to an ought, and everything that I say from this point onward should be interpreted as such and is subject to the litany of scrutinies that all ought statements are subject to. And like, you can really go overboard with your disclaimers, but some acknowledgement that's what you're doing is maybe not the worst thing in the world. Just to be honest, that you're pissing in the wind like everyone else when it comes to the nature of moral judgments and how people should live their lives. Like, you should always remember that your shit stinks too, is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, a description of material reality as a universe that is engaged in that kind of constant struggle with you, trying to dissolve you back into nothing. And based on that struggle, you are, as an individual who presumably does not want to be dissolved into nothingness, set in an adversarial position with life itself. You are fighting life. Now, if you are fighting life, then maybe you could think of the system by which, or the framework by which you attempt to improve your capacity to fight life successfully as a kind of martial art. There's the martial art of you and a sword against another person with a sword, and then there's like the martial art of you against a universe that's trying to kill you every day. And it's a more abstract type of fighting, I'll grant that. It's definitely not the same thing, as it's a much less discrete problem than just saying, hey, how do you armbar someone the best from this position or something along those lines? That's a pretty discrete question. Whereas, like, how do you survive against the universe trying to kill you in a million different ways? It's a big question, right? And there's a lot of different directions you could go from there. But nonetheless, I do think that it's an interesting way to think about one's place in the universe or one's relationship to the universe, and it's worth some serious contemplation, in my opinion, because was it Lenin maybe who said, or Trotsky, one of these pinko commie bastards, who said, whether you are interested in the revolution is interested in you, right? So it's like, whether you are interested in fighting against the universe is still going to be in opposition to you in a variety of ways, or at least in opposition to what we believe most people's stated goals are, which is to not die. So that's the framework. The framework is, you don't want to die, then you're going to have to do something about it. Right? If you don't want to be destroyed by the universe, then you should, there's the normative claim, you should practice a system or a discipline for resisting the power of the universe against you when it's adversarial to you. And then that's maybe a caveat that introduces some room for also embracing the universe when it is a positive force in one's life, right? When it is actually adding value in meaningful ways. I really don't have a strong position on like the balance between those two things. If you are someone who is currently suffering under extreme conditions of deprivation, and let's just say the hostility you are experiencing from the universe, and maybe you don't ascribe it to the universe as such, you ascribe it to very specific people who are victimizing you, right? That experience is pretty understandably going to lead to a broader conclusion about the hostility of the universe itself and the necessity of resistance to it. And maybe even a kind of radical or revolutionary resistance that denies the goodness, we're back to that term or concept, the goodness of the universe as such, right? How do you blame someone in the concentration camp for questioning the existence of a God that actually cares about you, right? That's the God on trial story in a nutshell. It's, if this sort of thing could happen to us, how could there be someone, a divine creator out there who gives a shit about what happens to us? There must not be. Now, there's an interesting conclusion to that story, of course, where they decide that there is no God, or at least no caring God, and then they just go and pray and celebrate the Shabbos like they would, even if they believed that he was there and cared, right? Which I think is an interesting commentary on the significance of ritual in human life, with or without the religious overlay, shall we say, right? That's not exactly the subject for today, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But like I wanted to put out there this concept of a framework for interpreting one's existence itself as a kind of struggle, as a kind of battle. By the way, there's all sorts of political theories. We're going to try and keep politics out of this as much as possible, but there are all kinds of political philosophies that fundamentally conceptualize reality as a kind of struggle between certain groups or identities. Again, we don't have to unpack those philosophies and what exactly they believe and which ones are good and which ones are bad. But let's just say some of you may be familiar with the title of a very well-known political manifesto that refers to an individual's struggle. Yeah, it is all about his struggle. And you may also be aware of a political manifesto that refers to a sort of broader group struggle. Yeah, a class struggle. Struggle finds its way into a variety of places, and that is something that I just want to encourage people to think about, not dwell on, not ruminate on, but contemplate, meditate on the relationship between their desire to continue existing and a universe that may or may not particularly care all that much about that desire. If you reject this framework altogether, you say, no. I believe firmly in the existence of a divine universal concept that does in fact care about my suffering and my existence and will see me through the hardships in my life as long as I maintain a sort of firm conviction in it and faith in it. I think that's beautiful. I don't have anything to say against that. I wonder, I have questions. I have questions about that faith and where it's rooted and how it's deployed in particular contexts. But I see the inherent beauty in it, absolutely. I ask those that do believe that sort of thing to extend the courtesy, if they will, to those of us whose framework actually is a little more adversarial, whose framework contemplates a universe or a creative energy out there that, while not being hateful or malevolent towards us, nonetheless has a kind of cruel indifference to our desires, and that we are therefore sometimes in opposition to life itself. And because we are in opposition to life itself, we must see, there's the normative claim. We should. I tried to sneak it in without announcing it, like I said that all the other people would do. If we are correct that there is this inherent adversarial quality to the universe, then wouldn't it be a good idea to have a framework in place to guide and assist the individual in confronting that reality? That is my hope and aspiration for my own philosophical journey, my own martial arts yoga journey. And I, of course, welcome the thoughts and reflections of anyone who's been kind enough to give me their time listening to this on how or whether they grapple, no pun intended, with this framework as well. Thanks much, and talk to you again soon.